Here they're asking us to find the domain and the range of this function. Now we have to recall that the domain is actually the x values of the function, and range is acceptable y values of the function, like what can you actually get out of this function. One thing that I do recommend doing is graphing it. So put this into y equals, type in negative square root 2x minus 6, make sure that's all underneath the square root, and make sure that the plus 2 is outside of the square root. And then your graph should look something like this. My graph starts at the point 3, 2, and it goes down and that way. So on the graph you can measure, how does this graph measure against your x-axis and your y-axis. So it appears that this graph starts at 3 on the x-axis and then becomes greater from there along the x. So I'd say, okay, x needs to be greater than or equal to 3. And along that y-axis, it looks like 2 is the highest value. So x would be decreasing or equal to 2 here. So another way that you can also find out this answer is by going to the table. After you put this into y equals, you can go to the table and check out your x and y values, and you should get an error for all the values that are less than 3 on the x, and then as soon as you get to 3 you start getting outputs. So that's another way to check what are the values of x that we're allowed to plug in. Now algebraically, another way that you could look at it is to think that we're only allowed to take the square root of a positive number. So I would just take what's underneath the square root and I'd say, well, that stuff, it's going to need to be greater than or equal to 0, or else we would get an imaginary number. And then what you would do from there is to just solve for x. Here I'm dividing by 2 now, and so I get x is greater than or equal to 3. See how I got the same answer as when I just graphed it or when I looked at the table? Okay, and then so there's our C or D, and then, well, the answer is D. And then also to get the range, the y values, you would just look at this whole thing here, and I know that square root is going to put out 0 or greater. And then I see we have a negative sign in front of the square root, so negative 0 is just 0. And then we also have this plus 2. So our y values are going to be 2 or greater. And that's how I can do that algebraically.